All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We are here live on Wednesday afternoon, a little bit later than our normal time. I wanted to be able to get all of the national media uh, radio appearances in Lexington done. Because there was no sense in me going up against Seth Greenberg on Alan Cutler's show, but also I just wanted to be able to react to some of those on today's show, which is what I will be doing as part of today's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. But first, if you are here watching live, you can jump on into the comments section, leave a comment with any questions or thoughts, and I will get back with you here live. If you're watching this sometime in the future, you can certainly leave a comment and I will get back to you then as well. But make sure you are subscribed here to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. Also, I host the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show podcast every Monday and Friday, so you can catch me on Spotify or wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes as well. And then be sure to follow me on both TikTok and Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Twitter is always the best place to stay up to date with all of my college basketball content. But today, at the back end of the show, we will talk a little bit about Kentucky's defensive issues. And again, I'll take any questions here live. But I primarily wanted to give my feedback on what's clearly one of the biggest topics within Big Blue Nation right now, and that is, to a larger extent, I would say Seth Greenberg, and to a lesser extent, Jay Williams, and some of their, I don't want to say attacks on Big Blue Nation, but just some of their takes on Kentucky fandom, how it pertains to Arkansas and all of that good stuff. And I think that really we listened to two interviews today, again, with Jay Williams going on KSR and talking with Matt Jones, and then with Seth Greenberg going on the Alan Cutler show, a show that I was on yesterday. And I think you just listened to two guys that essentially refused to really take ownership for what they were saying, in my opinion. I think that the Jay Williams interview was kind of just a circle of an argument where Matt would play a clip, he would give some, kind of say something that Jay said, and then, why do you think that way, or why do you think that anything that Kentucky fans say now has anything to do with what's going on at Arkansas? Jay Williams would say, well, I didn't say that, even though it was obviously heavily insinuated. Matt would say, like, well, but you insinuated it. And then Jay would say, well, based on my character, do you not think that if I wanted to say something, I would just say it? And because they're friends, understandably so, the combativeness would kind of end there, and then we would just go on to the next topic. But I think that, and you saw that to some extent with Seth Greenberg as well, when pressed on talking about quote unquote real fans, or some of his unwillingness to ever critique John Calipari, and he just kind of says, like, well, no, I critique him, I do these other things, and that there's been times where I've blasted his teams, blah blah blah. And I just think that we listen to two people today acting like there's no gray area, like there's no insinuation to your words, that they're essentially just spewing words, and you're supposed to just take every single thing, just hear the words, and don't give any context or further thought to them. And that was really frustrating, because I think that, and especially listening to Seth Greenberg's comments, one thing that really made me mad about what he said, because honestly, it triggered some thoughts of what John Calipari himself used to say, and it makes sense. They're friends. They probably have said some of these things back and forth to each other. But when he continued to talk about how, he just doesn't understand some of Kentucky's, he didn't use the word obsession, but so the way that Kentucky fans still follow Arkansas, and just get lost in your team. Well, I just put this on Twitter again at BRamseyKSR. It reminded me a lot of the comments that Coach Calipari would make over the last couple of years of, hey, don't bash the players, put the blame on me, put the blame on me. And in both instances, my answer is, hey, that's exactly what we're doing. Big Blue Nation is lost in this team. If you think that hardly any member of Big Blue Nation isn't over the moon with Coach Mark Pope, then you're simply not following anything that has to do with college basketball. If you think that there's any Kentucky fan that is more obsessed with what's happening in Fayetteville than what's happening in Lexington, you either have zero sense of the situation, or you're so detached from reality in your position that it is hard to take anything you say with credibility because you clearly can't properly analyze the situation, because every Kentucky fan is obsessed with this team. Every Kentucky fan is obsessed with Mark Pope. Every Kentucky fan is very, very happy with what is going on in Lexington. Now, are Kentucky fans more interested in what's happening in Arkansas than they've ever been before? Obviously. Our coach of the past 15 years, who won a national championship at Kentucky, is now the coach at Arkansas, a conference rival. He took 3 recruits, guys that we had gotten to know here at Kentucky. With him, he took 3 players with him that we watched play in the blue and white. So one of them for multiple years in Aduthiero. Well, of course, Kentucky fans are interested in what's happening in Arkansas. And I do think that there's different ends of the spectrum in terms of whether you kind of want Coach Cal and the guys to do well at Arkansas, or if you kind of take some, some secret satisfaction in some of their struggles. I do think there's people at both ends of those of that spectrum. But to insinuate for a second that we're not lost in this team and that we're still obsessing over Coach Cal and what happens at Arkansas, and that we're somehow piling on and that's impacting his ability to have success, which is something Jay Williams was insinuating. Like, those are silly, and they can come on different radio shows and they can backtrack and make you just read their quotes and act like that there's nothing more to it than what they said. But that's just silly, because that's not the way the world works. There's always meaning behind our words. And that's especially true for people in media. Like, anytime that you tweet something or you say something on a radio broadcast, you say something on a television broadcast, I do it. You guys do it. Anybody listening to the show does it. Seth Greenberg and Jay Williams and Matt Jones and Alan Cutler, all these people do it. And there's nothing wrong about it. But then when you're pressed and you want to act like that, well, you can only read the black and white words that I said, that's nonsense. And it was really frustrating today to listen to both of those professionals that have done this a really long time, to listen to them kind of try to backtrack. And because they're on local radio that gets listened to a bunch, and they're kind of trying to get back in the good graces of Big Blue Nation, it seemed like we don't need that, because we didn't need your comments to begin with. We didn't need you to tell us to get lost in our team. We didn't need you to tell us that you should be more focused on Kentucky than Arkansas. We're all good. We all know that. Trust me, like, we're happy with the way things turned out. We wouldn't have wanted what's happening in Arkansas now, because guess what? That would have been our season, if we're being completely honest. That we would have been experiencing a lot of that stuff. It might not be a 1-for-1, but a lot of those struggles, they just would have been happening in Lexington. So I just think that those two guys really missed the boat on not necessarily even their thoughts of Big Blue, but I just think that they've created this narrative in their head that we are still obsessed with Coach Calipari and Arkansas basketball, when it's just not true. We're busy with a top 10 team. We're busy with a team that has 6 quad 1 wins. We're busy with a team that has one of the best resumes in college basketball. We're busy in trying to compete for an SEC championship, compete to go to the second weekend, compete to go to a Final Four. We're not worried about the former coach who can't win an SEC game. And that's just point blank the way things are. And they seem to still not understand that, they being Jay Williams and Seth Greenberg. So those are some of my thoughts from that. Have some comments here from Question Everything. Thank you for being here. Yeah, he says we're over the moon on Coach Pope is our coach. I absolutely can't stand Jay Will. I mean, I honestly don't even like follow ESPN like that anymore. I mean, I obviously listen to commentators during games. I don't even have a strong opinion about either one of those guys. Generally speaking, there's not many commentators that I do like. I try to not listen to a lot of them as much as possible. Travis says mic drop. Yeah, I that's why we call the show All Fired Up. We got into it a little bit here today, but I just think that those guys that they do, and it's inevitable. Like I think we all live in a little bit of a Big Blue Nation Kentucky cocoon, and I talk about that from time to time, where we think our fan base is overly negative at times, or we get fired up about stuff like that. That kind of stuff happens at other places too. There's just more of us, and we see all of our own tweets, and we listen to all of our own podcasts and shows like this, and certainly KSR and all those things. So we hear all of our own stuff, as opposed to seeing what goes on outside. And I think that you're running into that with Seth Greenberg and Jay Williams, that they kind of wanted to think something about Big Blue Nation that just simply wasn't true. But we'll move on from a little bit of that. If anybody wants to chime in with any thoughts, we can certainly talk about them as we go along here. Gregory Butler says Arkansas is Nolan Richardson and Ron Brewer for me. And those were a lot more fun days in Fayetteville than what they're experiencing right now. That certainly is true. Those were some pretty fun Razorbacks teams back in the day. But shifting gears now to Kentucky, over the last few days, certainly since Saturday's game against Alabama, which I was there at Rupp Arena for, there's been even more talk about Kentucky's defense. And I think that we all know at this point, defense is the Achilles heel of this team. They are currently now ranked 78th in KenPom adjusted defensive efficiency. That's compared to being second on the offensive side of the ball. It's actually not all that dissimilar to the way things were last season, where Kentucky had finished with the number 7 offense, number 109 defense. Now, there's a lot of different schools of thought about what the issues are on the defensive side of the floor. I think some people think it can't change. Some people think it can change. Probably a lot of people that are somewhere in the middle. I do think it's difficult to make full sale changes. I think it's difficult to imagine this team becoming really good defensively, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, outside of Lamont Butler, Ortega Owe, and Amari Williams, we don't even necessarily have that great of individual defenders. And then secondly, in terms of some of the habits and, maybe lack of strength, lack of athleticism at different areas, these guys have played 100+ college basketball games. Like, Andrew Carr is not all of a sudden going to become, the fleetest of foot 4-man. Amari Williams isn't going to all of a sudden become this guy that's just going to, knock you around, even though he looks like $1 million. That's not necessarily the way that he plays. Jackson Robinson, Kobe Brea, these guys aren't going to all of a sudden become lockdown on ball defenders. That's just not going to happen after having played 100+ college basketball games. Now, can you see either some schematic changes or just kind of from honing in the film room, some of the lapses in concentration, some of the lapses in positioning, some of the bad closeouts? Can you clean up some of that stuff? You can always do that. But, and this is something I brought up on Twitter, I don't want to go too into the weeds because I'll be recording another episode of Zoom Action, our KSR film breakdown show for the KSR YouTube channel here in a little bit with Zach Gagan and Stephen Peak. That'll probably be out sometime tomorrow. But so I don't want to spoil too much of that episode. But I think that you have to be careful when you start throwing out some of these fixes on the defensive end, because you have to consider the impact that those have on the offensive side of the floor. These changes don't necessarily happen in a vacuum. You have to consider their impact, and especially on their impact on an offense that is very tempo based. We're going to play fast. We want to shoot a lot of threes. Also in the half court, it's very intricate. It takes a lot of brain power and concentration to run through all the different zoom actions and all these different looks that you get to constantly reading screens and reacting to all that. It's a high IQ offense that puts a lot of stress, mental stress, on the players. So does that excuse some of the mental lapses on the defensive end of the floor? No, it doesn't. Does it explain some of them? I think it does, to be quite frank with you. And I think that you can throw out some of the different critiques or fixes for the defense. What's one of them? Well, I want to see this team be more aggressive. I want to try to force some more turnovers. Okay, that's fine. I've been on the record. I've said on this show certainly several times. I've said it on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. I've said it at B Ramsey KSR on Twitter that I've been disappointed and surprised at this team's lack of ability to force turnovers. They're one of the worst in the country at forcing turnovers. So would I like to see them force more turnovers? Yes. But guess what? That comes with two kind of counterpoints. One being you're going to foul more if you play more aggressive. And guess what? Right now we foul more than anybody in the SEC, which is a problem. And I can touch more on that at a different time. But so now if we try to force more turnovers, we can force more turnovers, but now we're going to foul even more. And then guess what? That happens. We're already not super deep. So now guys have to play more minutes, or we're playing without some main guys because they're in foul trouble. So now we're more tired. Now you make more mistakes, and it probably impacts you offensively. And then also, if you're trying to force some of those turnovers, then that's taking more out of you on the defensive end, and maybe you leave a couple extra threes short, or you're a little slower in transition, whatever it may be. So there's a give and a take to being more aggressive, whether that means trying to jump passing lanes or hard hedging the ball screens, trapping some. The same thing could be said for, I want to see this team extend pressure a little bit more and throw out a full court press or trap in the half court, whatever it may be. Well, again, you're putting more stress on our bodies. You're opening yourself up to more fouling. So I think all of those things you have to consider the requisite impact that has on the offensive side of the floor, or even kind of the give and the take on the defensive side of the floor. Similarly, there's always a push that I lovingly poke fun at my fellow Big Blue Nation members sometimes about our collective obsession with zone defense. And I think that there's a lot of people, because we've mixed in some of that 1-3-1 this year. Heck, it very possibly won us that game out in Seattle against Gonzaga. We saw it for 5 possessions against Alabama with some success. But if you play some more of that zone, then 2 things become true. One, generally speaking, it's harder to rebound out of a zone than out of man. And we've already seen that this team has had their fair share of issues on the defensive glass. Part of that's because the SEC is so elite on the offensive glass. But I don't think we want to make things harder for this team in terms of defensive rebounding. Playing more zone would probably make it harder to defensive rebound. And then secondly, while it does help to limit some dribble penetration, it also makes it a little bit harder to cover things out on the wings and cut and take people away from 3, which has been a very, very big strength of this Kentucky team. So again, I'm not saying don't play zone. I'm not saying that you're wrong if you want to see more zone. I think you could mix it in more, but to act like that's just a kind of overnight fix, there's a give and a take with what you're doing there. I'll get to a couple comments here. Question Everything says, I have tickets for the Auburn game on March 1st. That's going to be awesome. Auburn, certainly with what they've done without Janai Broome here in the SEC has been incredibly impressive. It does kind of seem like now that maybe they are that kind of upper echelon team in college basketball this season. Travis says, I would rather be more sound defensively than forcing turnovers when you have a high-powered offense. But probably so, because you want to make sure that you're able to go down and execute the way that you want to offensively. I think that the issue that Kentucky is in right now, and I think you would agree with this, Trav, is that Kentucky, like I don't think you should be the team that fouls the most and the team that turns people over the least. Those two need to be positively correlated, not negatively correlated, and they are for some other teams. Texas A&M and Vanderbilt are the two teams that foul the most behind Kentucky. And guess what? They're number 1 and number 2 in turnovers created. There should be some sort of a correlation there. So to me, what Kentucky's issue is right now is, if you're going to foul this much, you either need to force more turnovers, or if you're not going to force turnovers, then you probably need to foul less, because it's one thing to foul due to being aggressive and therefore getting some turnovers, therefore getting some easy baskets. But it seems like that Kentucky is fouling despite not being very aggressive, which that kind of becomes a problem. And as you just said, that's where some of the lapses in concentration, some of the lapses in judgment, or just some lazy possessions, that becomes a problem. Gregory Butler says too slow in transition. Guys need to rebound quicker. Also, that's tough to do unless you have a nose like Dennis Rodman. And I think that's some of what you're seeing is Amari Williams has been excellent on the defensive glass. Every metric points to that. Heck, the dude's averaging like 18 or 8.8 rebounds in barely over 20 minutes per game. Those are some borderline Oscar Tshiebwe type numbers. He just played 30 plus minutes instead of 20 plus minutes. So he's been excellent. But aside from him, we just don't have big time rebounders. We've seen kind of on a game to game basis, whether it's Jackson Robinson stepping up one game, we'll take Owe stepping up one game. You've seen some of the guards help with that, but we just need more and more of it. And I think a lot of it comes down to physicality, where Andrew Carr's not the most physical guy. Jackson Robinson is certainly not the most physical guy. Kobe Bray is certainly not the most physical guy. So some of your other bigger guys with some length and or some athleticism, they just aren't maybe built mentality wise or physically to be excellent on the glass. So I think that's some of the things that you're talking about when you're looking at ways to improve defensively and some of that give and take that I'm talking about. Travis says transition game goes away a lot in the tourney. Half court offense is what you need. So them having that is key. I kind of think so too, because yes, as the teams get better and as the going gets tougher in the tournament, finding ways to execute in the half court becomes very, very crucial. And I think that the issue that Kentucky could run into, and it's something that we've all talked about since before the season, is who's that alpha dog? Who's that guy that can just break you down and get a bucket? Who's that guy that can kind of get you an easy one? And I talked about that being really the difference, I felt like, between Alabama and Kentucky, and why Alabama's just a little bit better than Kentucky, in large part because they have Mark Sears. They have a guy that can get them easy baskets, whether that be an easy kind of shake you up, pull up three off the dribble, whether that be Mark Sears driving it left and going to lay it up, whether that be Mark Sears driving it, drawing some help and kicking it out to another shooter or lobbing it up to somebody at the rim. He's able to create easy shots for Alabama. And honestly, so is Aiden Holloway and to a lesser extent, LeBaron Philon. Those guys are able to create for themselves, and those guys are able to create for others in a way that Kentucky just doesn't have that. That's not to say that Lamont Butler hasn't been an excellent playmaker. He's probably been better than any of us could have imagined. Actually, just today, I think it was the Sporting News, had him as a second-team mid-season All-American. Which honestly kind of took me off guard. I think he probably deserves it. I just hadn't thought about him like that. Otega Owe's been a better playmaker than I thought. And then obviously the system that has Kentucky's offense creates a lot of it in the half court. But I do think that there'll be a time where, whether, hopefully it's in the Final Four, but it could be the round of 32, where you kind of need a guy to be the guy. And I think that could be the issue on the offensive end that they run into. Yeah, I mean, Coach Pope really will get a lot of the credit, because this is a team where the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, it seems like. And that's what you want in a team, obviously. But there are times where you need, one of the parts to just go be the dude. And there is still, maybe a little bit of a worry that, compared to a Mark Sears or, even for Auburn, like a Johnny Broome, who you can just kind of throw it to and he can create something out of nothing. Or, even a Chaz Lanier at Tennessee. Now, he doesn't have the help around him that I think Kentucky has, certainly. But, when you look at a national champion type team, a lot of times they have one or two dudes like that can sort of make something out of nothing. But I think that in terms of the defensive end, there's a couple things to think about. First of all, they're probably not as bad as you think. The difference between like 78th in KenPom and 50th or so in KenPom is a pretty razor thin margin. Honestly, if you remove, obviously I know you can't remove them, but if you remove the Florida game and you remove the Alabama game, first of all, we won one of those games and we could have won the other one, but those are two games where the pace is just super high. Kind of the game almost kind of gets away from you a little bit, and it's just a score mentality. If you take away those two games, literally Kentucky jumps to the top 50 in defensive efficiency. So when these other games where the pace isn't just insane, and oh, by the way, I think it's actually good for Kentucky when the pace kind of gets insane. So I don't worry as much about the defensive efficiency there. And then also, these teams are really bunched up. Like, if you go to Vanderbilt and they throw up a clunker, if you go to Tennessee and they throw up a clunker, which is certainly possible, if you have one of these games where you win 81-62, all of a sudden you jump 15 spots. And I think that's, I appreciate that people love KenPom and some of these analytics sites so much, but sometimes you just need to watch the games and, not worry so much about that. It's like, this Kentucky team has gotten some stops when they need to get stops. You've already shown that you can beat Duke, you can beat Gonzaga, you can beat Mississippi State, you can beat Texas A&M, you can beat all these top 10, top 15 teams. A couple of some of them away from home or even on the road. So I'm not overly concerned. Sure, can you beat them all in succession over the course of 3 weeks and 6 games in the NCAA tournament? I don't know, but I'm happy that we're having that discussion because I don't think that anybody was grading this team on a national championship curve before the year. But here we are, January 22nd, kind of critiquing the team through a lens of making a Final Four or making a national championship run. And that's a good thing. I'll take another question here from Gregory Butler, who says, has Garrison played with Williams much this season? I actually talked about that on the Alan Cutler show yesterday. In fact, they played like 90 seconds together against Alabama. Actually, I think because of some of the back issues that Carr had, he was just playing a little bit less. So they played together for a stretch there. I didn't remember them playing together before that. Allen kind of seemed to think that they had, which I wouldn't be able to confirm nor deny. I haven't gone back and looked. But to answer your question, they've barely played together. And I think that one of the reasons for that is they both have shown themselves to be a little bit foul prone, as we have as a team. So you've kind of needed to stagger those minutes to make sure that they don't kind of each pick one up in succession, or you don't have a situation where they both have 2 fouls in the first half or whatever it may be. It's just kind of made more sense, I think, where you've sort of needed to stagger their minutes instead of playing them together. But I think it's certainly something to, maybe throw against the wall as the season goes along, especially, if hopefully you get Andrew Carr back to full strength, where he could steal some minutes at the 5 if you absolutely have to. That's always been something I've been interested with because of how good it makes you offensively. But yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with continuing to have some critiques and trying to see what works defensively. And I think the good thing is that even more so than in years past, everything that we're talking about, like whether it's more zone or whether it's pressing or whether it's changing up the ball screen coverages, whether it's different lineups, I feel pretty darn confident, and I think probably anybody watching this does too. Those conversations are all being had in the film room, in the locker room, in the coaching meetings. Whereas, like, to be quite frank, I don't know if it was always happening the last couple of years. Like, I don't think anything that we've talked about isn't something that's been talked about probably 3 weeks before we thought of it by Coach Pope and his staff. So that is a blessing as well. But yeah, thanks, Trav. It was a fun one today. But thank you to everybody who tuned in here live. Always makes the show more fun. So enjoy the back and forth with you guys. If you have a comment and you're watching this in the future, certainly drop your comment and I will interact in the comments here as well. Again, thank you for being here today for All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Please subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. I had a new Chalk Talk episode come out on Monday as well, breaking down that 9-0 run that Alabama made late in the second half. So you can go check that out for kind of some live film breakdown if you enjoy that content from me. You can also find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on Spotify. New episodes every Monday and Friday. And then to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing, just give me a follow on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Thanks for being here today and hope you all have a great rest of your week.